Okay, so here is a painting that somebody did. And if you notice what they did with the background, rather than just putting this guy on a flat background, they changed the background a little bit. And most people, you might say, well, it looks lighter here and darker here. But really, if you look closely, look at what he did here. He purposely made it darker near where his face is really light, okay? And back here, he made it lighter where the back of his head and his coat are really dark, okay? So it ends up bringing him out a little bit better. Now, not everything's like that. If you notice right down here, his coat is almost the same as the background. So this would be low contrast. There's a very small amount of contrast. This would be high contrast between his nose and the background, okay? So there's sometimes you want to do that in your subject to make it better than your photo, okay? A lot of kids think they have a photo and the photo is like perfect. You want to go beyond the photo and make a painting, okay? So here's the same artist, and you can see he did the same thing with this. Notice the background. Most people, if I showed them this picture, they'd think nothing of it. But when you look more closely, you can see it's a little darker here than it is over here. And he did that on purpose, so the subject jumps out a little bit more. This artist, his name's Thomas Hart Benton, lived in Kansas. If you notice, he does the same thing here. Notice the ceiling is a little lighter where his face is dark. Notice the ceiling is darker where his hair is white. And he does that all over the place. So like here, to make his thumb stand out, he makes his shirt a little darker. Here to make his little collar on his coat stand out, there's a little light edge and it's a little darker. He does the same thing with the edge of his buttons, inside his collar. He makes things more dramatically contrasting so the subject looks more three-dimensional, okay? Here's the same artist. This is a self-portrait of him, and you can see how he does that almost everywhere. Like he lightens it between his armpit where his coat is really dark, and then other areas he darkens it where his coat is really light. Now, he kind of exaggerates it, and you don't need to do it that much. Here's an artist named Rembrandt. He lived in the Netherlands in the 1600s, and he was known for having his subjects fade into the background, okay? And he was also known for this really dramatic lighting. Like you can see how bright the guy's face is and then how dark everything else is. Now, you can see the man has a hat on, but here you can barely make out the edge of the hat, and here the hat just sort of fades into the background, which was his decision. He thinks, I want to make my subject more part of the background. And you could do that same thing. So when you're working on your painting, you might say, I want to make this blend in more with the background, and then certain areas you're going to make stand out, okay? Now, if this was a photo you're working from, let's say, what could you do differently? Let's say this was a painting. What could you do to this painting to make it jump out a little bit more? Are there any specific areas that you could see could use a little more contrast because they kind of blend in? Katrina?
The blue man's arm, it's really dark underneath it, so you just make that darker, and then on the top lighter.
So a little darker underneath here?
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe lighter on top. Anything else that's a little confusing? Meadow?
Well, if you want it, like the greenery can always be made darker and still look realistic to make like their face and their hair pop off.
What's that? Say it again.
Like the bushes and the greenery can be made darker.
Yeah, you could do that. How about any specific person here could use a little more contrast? Yeah.
The girl on the right side.
Yeah. Lady on the right side, her blouse kind of looks like one big shape. So perhaps distinguish between the sleeve and her body. Perhaps distinguish between the sleeve and a little wrinkle here. Or even their hands kind of blend together. So if you were Thomas Hart Benton, you would add some more contrast on her blouse to make things jump out. Okay? Here's a photo of a jackrabbit. And what's kind of neat is this photo kind of does it already. Notice the way the jackrabbit's face is light, and it happens to be against the dark bushes. Notice how the tips of his ears are dark, and the bushes seem to be a little lighter up there. But there's parts of the rabbit, like his back, that kind of blend in. Do you need to make that high contrast? No, I can still tell it's a rabbit. I can see where it is. But if I choose to make him stand out, I could add more contrast. Just so if you might do a painting like this and say, I want to make this jackrabbit look more like he's camouflaged, and I just want a few things to stand out. I want him to look like he's part of the background, okay? So you've got those choices when you're doing your painting. How about here? Are there any problem areas in this photo that kind of blend together and they need a little more contrast? Emma, do you see anything here? Notice I'm going to start calling on people that don't raise their hand. Do you see anything here that kind of blends together? Any specific spots on this photo? See anything? Say it a little louder. Yeah, the guy in the middle kind of blends in with the guy in the background. Matter of fact, when you first glance at it, this looks like it could be his shoulder, or maybe this is his shoulder. But I think his shoulder is right in here, and definitely his shoulder is in here. So what I might do is purposely darken that guy in the background so that it separate him. Any other trouble areas on this picture? Yeah.
Right next to him, they're like tops are kind of the same color.
This guy here?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of the same color as him. So maybe we darken his sleeves so they jump out a little bit. It doesn't look like they're sharing the same wrinkles. Or look at this guy's arm compared to his leg. Okay? The leg and arm sort of blend right together. So maybe I darken his arm a little bit so I can see the difference between his arm and his knee there. So it still is a good photo. It still looks good. And you may choose in your painting to have some areas, maybe they will blend in. But in this particular picture, I'd want to make some things stand out a little bit by using contrast. So once again, if you were doing, let's say, a rock like this, I would want to make sure that that rock has that kind of texture. So once again, fur texture, something smooth. You know, a mouse, he's got a variety of textures. He's got a real heavy texture on his body here, much less one on his tail. He's got a little bit of texture on his ear and it starts to smooth out. And then he has like total opposite on his eye. It's like glass. It's really smooth like this mouse you'd have on a computer, okay? The orange has got a little texture on there. Now, you could guess what an orange looks like, but I've seen oranges. I've seen a million oranges. I've eaten thousands of oranges in my lifetime, but have I really ever studied their texture? So if I was going to do a painting, I would need to find a photo or a real orange and actually look at the texture and see how it's done, okay? This rock, we'll skip on ahead here. The bush, we did that, and the wave, you see something like this and you go, oh, that looks really hard. But if you just zoom in on part of it, starts to make a little more sense. You start looking at it as a wave, instead look at it as just colors. We talked about the elephant skin and how each one of these little things is almost like rocks. It's like light on the top here, and then it gets a little darker. Light on the top, it gets a little darker. And then we got deep creases, and some areas hardly any crease at all, okay? And once again, look at these rocks. They all have, there's a sort of rocks that have blue grays in them, the rocks that have a golden gray in them. So even though most people would look at rocks, they'd say rocks, they're gray and brown. Really, they're not. There's a lot of other subtle colors that are in those rocks, just like these rocks. Look at all the colors in there. I'm sure if you zoomed in on this, you'd see yellows, you'd see reds, you'd see blues, maybe even violets. You'd see a lot of colors in here, subtle amounts, but it's still rocks, okay? So, that's all I wanted to show you right now.